Apple may have just won consumer AI by being last, with an AI model that isn't even close to the smartest. ChatGPT is more powerful. Claude is better at complex reasoning. Apple used the tech behind Google's Gemini to help train its own models, and after promising a revolutionary Siri in 2024, then failing to deliver it, Apple had every reason to be the company nobody trusted in AI. But while everyone was down on Apple, they went to work on completely rebuilding the Siri that had been broken for 15 years. Now, because Siri's real problem was never that it was dumb, and don't get me wrong, it was dumb, but I also think that Siri was trapped. It couldn't see what you were doing, understand what was happening across your apps, or connect a question to the messages, emails, photos, and calendar events that make up your actual life. At WWDC 2026, Apple finally handed Siri those keys. And that creates the possibility the rest of the AI industry should find kind of terrifying. The AI war may not be won by the company with the smartest model. Instead, I think it may be won by the company whose model already lives in your pocket, controls the operating system, and knows enough about your life to be useful before you explain anything. Let's start by talking about the main issue with Siri across all these years. Siri launched with the iPhone 4S in 2011, 4 years before Amazon's Alexa. Apple was so early that the industry barely had language for what Siri was. You could ask your phone a question and hear an answer. For a moment, it felt like the future had arrived. Then Siri spent the next decade and a half pretty much standing still. Every year brought new voices, new languages, and a few new commands, but the basic experience barely changed. Ask for the weather and Siri usually worked. Ask a question that required context or memory or more than one step, and you were pretty much rolling the dice. That made Siri look like an intelligence problem. Underneath, it was a terrible architecture problem. The original Siri was essentially a voice-controlled command system bolted onto an operating system that had never been designed for an agent. Individual requests were routed into narrow domains like set a timer, call mom, play a song. Siri could trigger a supported action, but it couldn't freely reason across the phone or any other device. It couldn't see the app in front of you. It couldn't understand that send him the address referred to the person in your current conversation. It couldn't search an email, connect it to a calendar event, and find a related text message and give you one useful answer. Information was all right there. Siri simply wasn't allowed to reach it. And that was the 15-year curse. Apple had placed an assistant inside the most personal computer people owned, then trapped it behind walls that prevented it from understanding anything personal. At WWDC 2026, Apple showed the architecture designed to tear those walls down. Now, I did a full video explaining how it works, which I highly recommend checking out, but in a nutshell, the new system uses 5 custom Apple models and an orchestrator embedded into the operating system. That orchestrator decides which model should handle your request, what information it needs, and whether the work can happen on your device or requires more computing power in the cloud. Siri also gains on-screen awareness, so it can understand what you're looking at and combine that information with personal context from across your apps. The important change has nothing to do with the fact that Siri can produce a more eloquent answer now. It can finally understand what the question is about. That's the big change. Now, for the argument I'm making, one distinction matters more than everything else. Intelligence and access are 2 different advantages. Ask Siri what everyone is bringing to the neighborhood potluck this weekend. It can search your messages, email, and calendar, then assemble the answer. We talked about this before. Gloria's bringing watermelon feta skewers and Greg is bringing summer pasta. Go into ChatGPT and ask the exact same question and it has no idea what you're talking about. It doesn't know Gloria. It can't see the group chat. It doesn't know which Saturday you mean or where the potluck is happening. It knows none of this. Now, that doesn't mean ChatGPT is not capable of solving more difficult problems. It is. Siri has the information required to solve your typical everyday user problem. That distinction is the foundation of Apple's entire strategy here, and it leads directly to the advantage every AI lab wishes it had. The consumer AI market has spent 3 years behaving as though the best model automatically becomes the winning product. That makes sense when you're comparing models inside a browser window or using them to code. It makes less sense when AI becomes part of the operating system. Right now, using ChatGPT or Claude for something personal on your phone requires work. You find the app, open it, describe what you're doing, and manually supply whatever context the model is missing. If the answer depends on an email, photo, message, or event, you may have to leave the app, find that information, copy it or screenshot it, return it to the app, and explain why that matters. And again, the model is brilliant, but the experience there still begins with homework. A third-party assistant could ask for deeper access, but every additional permission creates friction and risk. Do you want one company reading all your emails, your messages, indexing all your photos, another one watching your screen? Those permission walls obviously exist for good reason. Apple starts from a different position. It built the operating system, the chip, the secure enclave, and the privacy framework surrounding the data. When Siri needs information from your screen, messages, or calendar, Apple can process much of that right on your device. When a larger model is required, private cloud compute is designed to extend that security into the cloud. That gives Apple an advantage no standalone chatbot can recreate on your iPhone, even if it has a better benchmark score. Anything you ask those stronger models has to be processed in the cloud. For consumer AI, the complete product is the model, your personal context, permission to use it, an interface that's always available, and enough trust for you to say yes. Apple controls that entire stack. It can rent raw model capability when necessary. And this is where the side button becomes key. Most people don't want to choose among 6 different models. They don't want to think about context windows, tokens, or which requests should run locally versus which ones should run in the cloud. They want to hold down one button or just say the Siri command, ask a question in normal language, and get an answer that understands the situation. The best model in the abstract may be less valuable than a good model that already knows what my flight, that restaurant, and the photo she sent me refer to. That is why the demo felt so ordinary. Mike Rockwell held the side button and talked to Siri.
How can I get tickets? Okay, you have to enter a lottery to get the tickets. Remind me to sign up when the lottery opens. Okay, got a reminder.
No elaborate prompts, no permission mazes, or explanation of the backstory. But that ordinariness is the breakthrough. The winning consumer technology usually disappears into behavior. People don't think about which system indexes Spotlight or how iMessages get routed. They perform an action and expect the device to understand. Apple is trying to make AI feel the same way. ChatGPT brought generative AI to the public, and it was and still is impressive. Apple's opportunity here is turning it into a reflex. So let me ask you this. Has AI changed something you do every day? Not a demo you tried or an image you generated once just to see how it worked. Something that has become part of how you work, communicate, plan, or make decisions. Drop a yes or no down in the comments, because I think the gap between knowing about AI and instinctively using it is still enormous. And that gap is where Apple plans to live. But distribution alone doesn't guarantee victory. To see how defensible Apple's position really is, you have to look at who could realistically challenge it. On paper, consumer AI is one of the most crowded markets in technology. In practice, very few companies have all the pieces required to compete with Apple at the operating system level. So let's start with OpenAI. ChatGPT reached 100 million users in roughly 2 months and became the product that defined the current AI era. But OpenAI's most valuable growth is increasingly tied to coding, developers, and enterprise customers. Just look at their announcement of the new ChatGPT 5.6, Sol, Terra, and Luna models, along with the new ChatGPT desktop app, which is not good. They literally tucked the chat portion of ChatGPT into a corner and optimized the rest of the app for coding. Those are areas where users will pay for greater intelligence. Even if OpenAI wants to own personal AI, it still faces the same structural problem. It doesn't control the iPhone or Android. Then there's Anthropic, which is even more focused. Claude is exceptional at reasoning, writing, research, and coding, but Anthropic's center of gravity has always been safety, frontier research, and again, enterprise. Claude can be a powerful tool on your phone. Becoming the invisible intelligence layer of that phone is a different challenge altogether. Then there's Google, which is the one competitor with nearly every required asset. It has frontier models that even Apple relies on. Android, cloud infrastructure, apps containing enormous amounts of personal data, and their own hardware in the Pixel. But Android is distributed across hundreds of manufacturers, each with different hardware, software, update schedules, and business incentives. Google can create its purest version of Gemini on Pixel, but Pixel represents a small share of the global smartphone market. Apple can design one architecture and push it across a massive installed base of tightly integrated devices. Microsoft has frontier AI partnerships and control of the dominant desktop operating system, but its strength is work. Copilot fits naturally into Microsoft 365, GitHub, and enterprise software. Windows also lacks the always with you personal context concentrated inside a smartphone. Meta has the most credible head start in AI wearables. Its smart glasses are genuinely impressive, and they show why a camera plus conversational model can become a powerful new interface. But Meta still depends on the smartphone platform that it doesn't control. The glasses may sit on your face, while the operating system, permissions, and much of that personal data remain somewhere else. Amazon had the opposite problem. Alexa achieved enormous household distribution, but never gained the smartphone in your pocket. Without that personal device, Alexa remained tied to rooms rather than your life. Amazon tried to solve that with the Fire Phone. We know how that ended, but if you need a refresher on that spectacular failure, I have a video on that one as well. I will link it below. Run through the field and the pattern becomes pretty clear. The smartest AI companies lack the operating system. The operating system companies lack Apple's combination of mobile scale, vertical integration, personal context, and privacy credibility. That doesn't make Apple unbeatable. It just means competitors have to fight from structurally weaker positions. And visual intelligence may expand that advantage beyond the iPhone and Mac. You see, at WWDC, Apple showed Siri understanding the world through the camera app. Point the phone at a restaurant, product, or document, and Siri can identify what you're seeing, connect it to relevant information, and help you act on it. On the phone, that can look like another useful camera feature. On a pair of glasses, it becomes the interface. Now, Apple hasn't announced those glasses, but the path is difficult to miss. And it already works in the Vision Pro, where it can use visual intelligence on both real-world objects as well as digital ones, which is wild to try. Siri's new architecture gives Apple an assistant that can understand your personal context, and visual intelligence gives it eyes. Move those capabilities from the iPhone in your hand to something you wear, and Apple has the foundation for the next computing platform. Meta may arrive earlier, but Apple would arrive with the iPhone, the apps, the accounts, the permissions, and the history already attached. So that's the case. Now we need to deal with the giant reason that nobody should declare victory yet. Everything I've described sounds convincing in a keynote. We know that because Apple gave us a convincing keynote 2 years ago. In 2024, Apple demonstrated a more personal Siri that could understand context, see what was happening on screen, and take action across apps. Many of those capabilities never shipped. The features that did arrive were modest. The gap between the advertising and the product became so severe that Apple ultimately paid $250 million to settle false advertising claims. So there was one fact more important than every architecture diagram and control demo. Siri AI is currently beta software. It's limited to English. But even bigger issue, frontier models from everyone else improve every few months. How quickly can Apple distill those advances into its own models? Can it keep the system current without rebuilding the training pipeline every time Gemini takes another leap? Now, I get it. Finding a flight confirmation does not require the world's best reasoning model. Summarizing a family group chat does not require a PhD level research agent. Locating the photo your friend sent you last month requires access, speed, and contextual understanding far more than frontier intelligence. Using the largest, most expensive model for every routine request would also be economically absurd. Consumer AI needs smaller models that can handle enormous volume quickly and cheaply, preferably on your device, already consuming the power. Apple's bet is that good enough intelligence combined with exceptional context will beat exceptional intelligence starved of context for most daily tasks. And I think that bet is accurate. The most realistic future is not Siri replacing ChatGPT or Claude. It's Siri absorbing the everyday 90%. Messages, schedules, reminders, photos, travel details, and questions about whatever is currently on your screen. Specialized models handle the other 10%, coding, deep research, long-form creation, and difficult reasoning. Siri handles the frequency, frontier models handle the complexity. If that happens, Apple doesn't need to dominate every category of AI. It captures the layer people touch most often, and in technology, the layer that becomes habitual can be much more valuable than the tool that occasionally performs miracles. So, does Apple actually win AI? If winning means building the most intelligent model in the world, no. ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini will continue doing things Siri can't, at least that's my guess. But as I've shown, that may be the wrong definition of winning. Apple doesn't need Siri to write your code, conduct deep research, or replace every other AI tool. It needs Siri to become the assistant you use without thinking. The one that knows which flight you're asking about, who mom is, what restaurant your friend texted you, and whether that appointment conflicts with something already on your calendar. That is the behavior Apple is positioned to own. The everyday questions, repeated billions of times, where personal context matters more than raw intelligence. And that is how the 15-year Siri curse finally gets broken. Siri spent a decade and a half waiting for the right answer while locked outside of your digital life. Apple has now given it access to the screen, the apps, and the personal context that make those answers useful. The models do still have to perform. Apple still has to ship what it promised. After 2024, nobody should give the company credit based on a keynote alone. But if this architecture works, and in my testing of the beta, it has been superb, then the most important AI assistant won't be the one that scores highest on a benchmark. It'll be the one you can ask about your life without explaining your life first. That is the race that Apple's running, and I don't think anyone else is catching up to them anytime soon. Thanks for watching as always, guys. I appreciate your support. I'm Andrew Edwards, and I will catch you in the next video.